If slow-burn corporate love stories about a fallen CEO and the janitor who saves his company move you, please like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next cinematic story on this channel. By midnight, the 32nd floor of Nexline Capital Systems looked like a crime scene made of paper. Charts lay scattered across the long glass table in the war room. Red ink slashed through numbers and graphs like stab wounds. Headlines glared from printouts, Fintech golden boy exposed. Nexline's magic model was built on sand. Adrian Locke stood at the window, staring down at Manhattan. The city glowed as if nothing had happened, bridges lit, cars streaming along the West Side Highway, the river catching points of light. Inside, his reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. Behind him, one of the directors finished talking. 60 days, Brent, the man said. That's as far as the funds will stretch if clients keep pulling out. The board wants options on the table. Adrian, a sale, a merger. If you can't steady this, we'll have to consider new leadership. New leadership. The polite way to say, you've become a liability. Adrian's jaw tightened. We wouldn't be here, he said quietly, if I hadn't signed off on those data feeds. You did what everyone in this space does. The director replied. You trusted a vendor and the model worked until it didn't. Adrian turned. Until it helped vaporize retirement accounts, he said. Until we amplified a fraud instead of catching it. That's not something I can shrug off as standard operating procedure. The director held up a placating hand. Look, he said, I'm not here to debate ethics. I'm here to tell you the board's position. Fix it in 60 days, or we move on. You wanted to be the one in charge. This is the cost. He gathered a stack of papers and headed for the door. A single sheet slipped from the pile and skidded across the polished floor, stopping near the leg of a chair. Neither man noticed. When the door closed, the room fell silent except for the low hum of the HVAC and the steady beep of a server monitor in the corner. Adrian walked back to the table. On top was the latest draft of Project Beacon, the model he'd hoped would redeem him. An attempt to rebuild Nexline's forecasting engine from the inside out. He flipped through the pages, columns of numbers, equations, diagrams connecting data sources, a glowing, carefully constructed vision of something that might restore trust, if anyone ever trusted them again. He saw, suddenly, not math but faces. The client from Ohio who'd spoken with shaking hands on a video call, saying he didn't know how to explain the losses to his wife. The junior analyst who'd apologized to him for not seeing it, when the fraud hadn't been her fault at all. His father, in a memory, pushing a mop across a hotel lobby floor, saying, if you ever get to sit in the big office, kid, don't forget the people cleaning under your shoes. He had forgotten so many things. Adrian's throat tightened. He grabbed the Beacon printout in both hands. This is useless, he muttered. And then he tore it in half. The rip echoed in the glass box of a room. He didn't stop there. He ripped the halves again, into quarters, into smaller scraps. Symbols and numbers fragmented under his fingers. When he was done, it looked like a snowstorm of ruined work over the table. He stood there breathing hard, then scooped some of the pieces into a pile and swept them into the trash. The last fragment, one with the Beacon title block at the bottom, slipped away, gliding under the lip of the table to the floor. He didn't see it. He grabbed his coat and left the war room without looking back. The door sighed shut behind him. The lights dimmed automatically, sensing no movement. For a while, the only sound was the soft hum of servers and the distant, constant throb of the city through the glass. Then the elevator dinged. Nova Reyes pushed her cleaning cart out onto the 32nd floor, humming under her breath. She smelled stale coffee, stress, the sour tang of takeout containers abandoned near the trash. War room nights were always the worst. She swiped her badge at the glass door and stepped inside, dragging the cart behind her. The place looked like someone had shredded a thesis. What did they do to you? She murmured to the papers, more to herself than to anything else. She started with the obvious trash, empty coffee cups, water bottles, napkins. She stacked the less mangled documents in a pile just in case someone wanted them later. A glint of light caught her eye near the floor. Nova knelt, Half under the table lay a single sheet of paper, untouched by the earlier destruction. She slid it out. The title at the top read Nexline Project Beacon, Internal Draft. Nova's heart gave a strange, small lurch. Lines of matrix notation ran down the page. Arrows pointed to external feeds. A chart at the bottom showed error curves and confidence intervals. It wasn't the neat, polished math from textbooks. It was messier, more alive. Someone had been wrestling with this, trying to make the numbers tell a different story. She recognized the skeleton of the model from articles she'd read about Nexline years ago, before she knew their magic was propped up on a rotten foundation. Underneath, the equations shifted, introducing a new layer. It was good, and also wrong in ways she could feel in her teeth. Nova traced a line with her finger. "You're leaning on them again," she whispered, "on the same bad pipe." The third-party data vendor's name was in small letters at the bottom of the diagram, the one she'd worked for once upon a time. The one that had ignored her when she'd flagged duplicate IDs and impossible patterns. "If you spot something, log it and move on," her supervisor had said. "We're paid to deliver structured feeds, not opinions." She had needed the paycheck. Her mother's hospital bills didn't care about her ethics. She had logged it. She had moved on. And somewhere, a line had moved in a model, and the world had tilted on people who never saw it coming. Guilt lived under her skin like a permanent bruise. Nova straightened, paper in hand. She should throw it away. It wasn't hers. It wasn't her business. She looked at the equations again. They looked back at her, quietly accusing. "If you see it and walk away twice," a voice in her head murmured, "it's not just their fault anymore." Nova folded the sheet carefully and slipped it into the side pocket of her cart. The trash bag rustled as she began gathering the rest of the ruined pages. The war room swallowed her small sounds whole. When she left, the only traces of the night's drama were a few faint red streaks on the glass table where someone's pen had bled. Her apartment in Queens was really just a room with ideas. Ideas of walls that didn't actually exist, carved out by where she'd pushed furniture. Ideas of a living room made by a secondhand sofa pressed against one wall, a low coffee table scarred with old water rings, a TV balanced on a crate. One whole corner was taken up by a small desk in a tangle of cables. Her laptop sat open, streaming the recorded lecture she'd fallen asleep to 2 nights ago. "You are not allowed to fail me twice," she told the video box in the corner as she dropped her keys on the counter. She made instant noodles, poured them into a chipped bowl, and carried it to the desk. The paper from the war room lay there, smoothed out, weighed down by her statistics textbook. Nova stared at it the way climbers might look at a sheer wall. Not with fear exactly, with a kind of grim fascination. The beacon model's bones were solid, but the feed structure made her stomach knot. She dug in her bag for a pen, not a black one, a red one, chewing on the cap for a moment before clicking it open. She started circling. "Here," she wrote in the margin, "you're trusting a vendor with no independent anomaly checks. Here, you're pulling in credit data from a source with known duplication issues. Here, you're weighting short-term volatility like it's signal instead of noise." On another page, she started sketching alternatives. What if you inserted a sentinel layer before the Model A system built to watch the data instead of the price movement? Something that could say, "This input looks like a scam," before the output became a recommendation. She knew too well what happened when you trusted the wrong input. Her phone buzzed with a message from her younger brother, Mateo. "You working again?" It read, "Remember to sleep sometimes." She smiled despite herself. "Always," she typed back. "Go study. I'm rewatching Eigenvalues for fun." "Nerd," he replied, with an emoji. Nova flipped the paper back over. At the bottom of the beacon draft was an empty, blank section labeled Open Questions. She scribbled there, "If you don't fix where the numbers come from, it doesn't matter how pretty your math is. Garbage in, disaster out." She underlined disaster once. Then she set the pen down and stared at what she'd done. She had just marked up the work of Adrian Locke, the man finance blogs had once called the future of markets. At 2 in the morning, at a wobbly desk in a rented room, in red ink, she huffed out a small, incredulous laugh. "Okay," she murmured to the paper. "Now what?" She had no direct path to him. No reason he'd listen if she did. She could slide the page under some VP's door and watch it get ignored by a secretary. She could hold on to it like a private homework assignment, a puzzle solved in a vacuum. Or she could do something small and possibly stupid. She folded the sheet neatly in thirds. On a blank sticky note, she wrote, "You dropped this. The math isn't beyond repair yet." Someone who used to ignore red flags. She stuck the note to the top. She didn't let herself think too much about it as she shoved the page into her bag. If she thought too long, she knew herself. She would tuck it in a drawer and tell herself it didn't matter. The next night, she lingered on the 32nd floor after emptying the trash. The war room door was closed. Light glowed faintly around the edges. She checked the hallway. Empty. She slipped the folded paper under the crack at the bottom. Sticky note facing up, pale against the dark. Then she walked away, careful not to look back. Nova finished the rest of her rounds with her stomach buzzing like she'd had too much coffee. She was halfway through mopping a corridor when a memory rose uninvited. Her father's voice, tired after a shift driving a truck, saying, "We do what we can with what we have, mija, and when we know better, we do better." She hoped, fiercely, that knowing better counted for something now. Adrian arrived early. Sleep had been the kind that didn't rest anything, just blurred one set of worries into another. He took the executive elevator up, nodded at a security guard, walked the familiar corridor past the framed magazine covers with his younger face on them, and unlocked the war room. Something white lay just inside the door. He frowned, bent, and picked it up. The Nexline header stared back at him. Project Beacon, internal draft. Someone had written all over it. Red circles, arrows, notes in the margins. The handwriting was tight but legible, leaning forward like it was in a hurry. "You're relying on the same dirty feeds that broke the model in the first place. If you don't account for ID duplication here, you're making a very pretty hallucination. Volatility is not the same as insight. This waiting turns noise into gospel." At the bottom, in the open question section, a different note. "If you don't fix where the numbers come from, it doesn't matter how pretty your math is. Garbage in, disaster out." He read the sticky note at the top. "You dropped this. The math isn't beyond repair yet." Someone who used to ignore red flags. He stood very still. He tried to imagine which of his senior quants would have dared scrawl on his work like this. None of their handwriting looked like this. He'd seen their whiteboard notes for years. He thought of the board meeting the night before, of being told to fix it in 60 days or step aside. The phrase "very pretty hallucination" stuck in his head. He saw his own mistake laid bare. They had trusted that because the outputs had looked impressive, the inputs must have been sound. They had let volatility masquerade as signal. They had let something dirty pipe straight into something complex, and complexity had fooled them into thinking it was truth. He set the paper on the table and pulled out a chair. By the time his assistant knocked 20 minutes later, he was still reading the red ink. "Adrian," she asked, poking her head in, "the board wants you on the 9 a.m. call. They keep using words like strategic options." "Of course they do," he said absently. He glanced down at the page. "Tell them I'll be there," he added. He slid the marked-up Beacon draft into his folder. On the call, when one director scoffed at the idea of rebuilding anything in-house, Adrian found himself saying, "We were hallucinating before. Unless we're willing to admit that, we're going to hallucinate again." It was almost verbatim what the red pen had implied. One of the few sympathetic board members, Victoria Hale, narrowed her eyes at the word. "Haven't heard you talk like that before," she said. "Feels honest." He didn't reply. After the call, he went to find someone who might help him follow the ink trail. "You want me to do what Malik Jordan asked?" The senior engineer sat in a rolling chair in the corner of the server floor, mug of tea in hand, watching a field of LED lights blink like a tiny electronic city. "Check who dropped a piece of paper under my door," Adrian said. "Since when do we have time for paper forensics?" Malik asked dryly. "Since that paper pointed out 3 critical vulnerabilities in the Beacon model and did it in cleaner language than our last audit," Adrian replied. Malik blinked. "You're serious," he said. "Totally." Adrian said, "We have corrugator cameras. Just look at last night between 2 and 3 a.m. Anyone near the war room? Malik muttered something about paranoia but swiveled toward his console. 20 minutes later, he had the footage. They watched it together. People came and went all evening, suits and coats and backpacks. After midnight, traffic thinned, lights dimmed. At 2:17 a.m., a cart rolled into view. A woman in a green janitorial uniform pushed it. Her hair was pulled into a knot. Her sneakers squeaked softly on the floor. She stopped at the war room door, glanced around, bent, and slid something under the crack. Her face never turned toward the camera. The angle caught only her profile for a moment, the shadow of high cheekbones, the line of her jaw. Then she was gone. That's one of the night crew, Malik said. I figured, Adrian said. You know her name, Malik asked. Adrian swallowed. No, he said. His father's voice surfaced unbidden. If you can't look the cleaners in the eye and call them by name, you're not leading anybody. You're just managing numbers. Can you find out, Adrian asked. Malik gave him a look. You're the CEO, he said. Ask HR. Adrian grimaced. Right, he said. He made a note, then found his feet carrying him somewhere else first. Down to the server floor. If the author of those red marks was going to be anywhere, it would be near the hum of the machines. He heard her before he saw her. A low murmur, a quiet commentary to herself more than anything. That's not how I would normalize that, she was saying. You're overfitting, dude. Calm down. He rounded the corner. She stood by a rolling rack of servers, a rag tucked into the waistband of her uniform pants, one gloved hand resting lightly on a printout taped to the side of a cabinet. Her lips moved as she read, eyes narrowed, brow furrowed in concentration. Nova sensed him and straightened, hand dropping. Sorry, she said quickly. I know I'm not supposed to touch anything. I was just dusting. She lifted the rag as evidence. Adrian glanced at the printout. It was a network diagram, one of Malik's. Do you understand any of that, he asked. The question came out more curious than accusatory. A little, she said cautiously. Her badge read Nova Reyes, contract custodial. He nodded toward the diagram. What do you see, he asked. She hesitated, then gave in to the impulse that always itched under her skin when she saw a cluster of nodes and edges. You're pushing too much through one API, she said. If it hiccups, your whole graph chokes. You could load balance here and here. She pointed twice. Precise. He looked at her closely now. You're not just dusting, he said. I like math, she said. He chuckled, a short, surprised sound. That's one way to put it, he said. She shifted her weight, unsure if she'd overstepped. Mr. Locke, she added quickly. Sir. He realized she knew exactly who he was. He also realized he had never, until now, asked who she was beyond the name on the badge. I'm Adrian, he said, at least down here. Her eyebrows lifted. Okay, she said slowly. Adrian. He gestured toward the paper. You ever done this professionally, he asked. Systems, data, anything like that. Studied it? She said. Didn't finish. Life got in the way. She swallowed. And for a while, she added, I did some data entry. For Vertex Data Group, he felt that name like a punch. That vendor, he asked. She nodded. I was on a contract, she said, cleaning up incoming feeds before they piped them out to clients like you. He heard the bitter emphasis on like you. I saw things, she said, duplicate IDs, accounts that looked like someone had copy-pasted with a different name. I flagged them. My supervisor told me to stop slowing the pipeline. We're not the cops, she said. We're the hose. Her mouth twisted. I needed the job, she said. My mom was in the hospital. My brother was starting college. So I shut up and kept typing. She glanced at him. I watched the news the day Nexline crashed, she said. The tickers. The interviews. I kept thinking, if I'd screamed louder, made a bigger mess, maybe someone upstream would have noticed before it reached you. Adrian absorbed that in silence. He saw, suddenly, the entire chain. A company paid to deliver clean data. A junior contractor who saw contamination and was told not to make trouble. A startup that built its models on top of that poison and sold them as insight. And him, standing on stage, taking credit when it worked, blaming unforeseen anomalies when it didn't. You weren't the only one who stayed quiet, he said softly. I saw the contracts. I knew we'd outsourced risk. I pretended the complexity made it okay. She studied his face. You read the fine print, she said. I just clicked submit. Both decisions broke something, he replied. For a moment, the only sound was the rush of air through the vents and the faint whir of hard drives. He took a breath. I got a piece of paper under my door last night, he said. Beacon draft. Red pen all over it. Her cheeks flushed. I left that, she admitted. I thought maybe if someone told you the math wasn't beyond repair, you might keep trying. He nodded. You were right about the feed, he said. About the hallucination. About the disaster. A mix of relief and fear flickered across her face. I didn't mean to overstep, she said quickly. If it was inappropriate, it saved me a month of wandering down the wrong path, he said, cutting her off. She blinked. He looked around the server floor, at the blinking lights, the humming machines. You know, he said that when I was a kid, my father was a janitor. Night shift, like you. Different building, different city. He used to come home and tell stories about the executives who never saw him, who stepped over his bucket in the lobby without looking down. He met her eyes. I swore, he said, that if I ever ended up in a big office, I'd remember who kept the lights on and the floors clean. Somewhere along the way, I stopped looking. Nova shifted, uncomfortable with the intensity in his gaze. You're looking now, she said. Too late for some people, he replied. Maybe not too late for all. He glanced back at the printout. I'm planning something, he said slowly. A new project, not just another model. A sentinel that watches the data itself, catches the kind of rot you saw at Vertex before it ever touches our clients. Her eyes brightened, despite herself. A risk sentinel, she said. Exactly, he said. I've been calling it Lantern in my notes, something to throw light on the pipes before we drink from them. She smiled faintly. Nice name, she said. I want you in the room, he said. Working on it. She stared. I cleaned that room, and she said, I don't sit at the table. Maybe it's time that changed, he said. She shook her head. The board would never go for it, she said. They barely go for you right now. Then we don't tell the board, he said. Not yet. We work after hours. Quiet, a small team. Me, Malik, you. She looked down at her hands. Why would you risk that, she asked. After everything. Because the last time I ignored a red flag, he said, it cost people their lives as they knew them. I'm not doing that again. And because you're the only one in this building who's seen this mess from both sides, she exhaled, a careful, shaky thing. I have another job, she said, and classes. And I'm not asking you to break yourself, he said. We'll work around your shifts. Whatever you can give. He tried to keep his tone even, not pleading, not pushing. If you say no, he added, I'll still build Lantern, but it will be poorer without your eyes on it. She thought of the beacon model on her table, of the satisfaction of making the red lines and the equations argue with each other until something made sense. She thought of standing in places she wasn't supposed to stand and speaking anyway. I'll try, she said finally, a small, cautious commitment. He nodded. Then we start tonight, he said. Project Lantern was born in the strange hours when most of Nexline slept. The lab on the 20th floor had once been used for hardware tests. Now it became their little off-the-books workshop. Malik set up a separate network segment, air-gapped enough to keep the board's compliance scanners from flagging resource spikes. Adrian brought a takeout in his notebooks. Nova arrived after her cleaning rounds, hair pulled back, hoodie hiding her uniform logo. They met under the blue-green glow of monitors in the soft stutter of test rigs. Lantern grew in layers. The first layer watched for obvious fraud duplicate IDs, impossible credit histories, accounts that appeared out of nowhere and behaved too perfectly. The second layer studied patterns over time, building a sense of normal for different sectors, then flagging anything that drifted too far without a plausible story. The third layer watched the watchers themselves, logging who approved overrides, who ignored warnings, who tried to silence alerts. Nova's fingerprints were everywhere. "This is where they hid it," she said, pointing to a cluster of red nodes on one of the graphs. "They shaved edges off real accounts and glued them to fake ones. If Lantern been running, it would have screamed." Malik whistled. "You really did work on the other side of the wall," he said. She shrugged. "From the cheapest chair in the room," she said. "But yeah." Between code sprints and model tuning, there were small, almost quiet acts of care. One night, when Nova winced and rubbed her stomach, Adrian traded her coffee for a steaming mug of chamomile tea. "My father swore by this on night shifts," he said it kept his stomach from dissolving. She sniffed it. "Smells like flowers and bad decisions," she said. But she drank. On another night, when she shivered in the overcooled lab, he handed her a faded Nexline hoodie. "Vintage," he said. "Year one, back when we thought we could fix finance overnight." She pulled it on. "How's that going?" she asked. He smiled, tired and genuine. "Ask me after Lantern," he said. She started leaving him small notes on sticky tabs. "Remember, eyes need rest like servers do, or they burn out and take half the system with them." Malik found one and laughed. "Finally, someone's telling you what I've been saying for a decade," he told Adrian. Word of Lantern filtered out in fragments. An engineer noticed server logs spiking after midnight and mentioned it in passing to someone on the risk committee. By the time the rumor reached Victoria Hale, it had grown into something else. "Are you running some kind of shadow model back there?" she demanded in the next board meeting. Adrian kept his expression neutral. "I'm working on a Sentinel," he said. "If it fails, the only thing at risk is my pride." Victoria's gaze was sharp. "He's diverting resources without approval," she said later to another director. "And someone who pushes a mop is messing with live systems." She didn't have proof of the last part, but she had instincts, and instincts had made her rich. She began watching the logs more closely, which is how, the night before the Lantern demo, she knew exactly when to make her move. The demo was supposed to be quiet. Adrian had invited 2 former clients, people whose portfolios had taken heavy hits but hadn't completely abandoned Nexline, and a representative from the regulatory agency that had opened a file on their collapse. He'd promised them a look at the system he hoped would keep any of this from happening again. Nova stood in the back of the lab, hands clasped behind her to stop them from shaking, hoodie sleeves pulled over nervous fingers. She had helped build this thing, line by line, check by check. She knew its strengths and its limitations. What she didn't know was if it would behave under the weight of other people's eyes. Malik walked the guests through the setup. "We're going to replay the data feed from the week of the crash," he said, "exactly as it came in. Lantern will sit between the raw feed and the model we used back then. If it works, you'll see what should have happened." The old model's output graph appeared on one side of the screen, a sharp, seductive line trending up. On the other, Lantern's dashboard came to life. At first, nothing. Then yellow lights blinked. Then red. A warning flashed: unusual ID clustering detected. Possible synthetic accounts. And other credit history anomalies. Correlation with low-volume entities. The regulator leaned forward. "So this would have flagged the fraudulent segment before your model ever recommended buying into it?" she asked. "Yes," Adrian said. "It would have cut off the feed entirely until someone reviewed the source. And if someone overrode it," one of the clients asked. "Lantern logs overrides," Nova said, before she could stop herself, "including who clicked and what justification they gave. You don't get to say the system did it anymore." All eyes turned to her. Heat rose up her neck. "This is Nova Reyes," Adrian said calmly, "head of data integrity for Lantern." She almost choked. He hadn't used that title before, but saying it out loud somehow made it true. The clients nodded slowly. "And where was Lantern back when we first invested with you?" one asked. "Only half joking." Adrian's jaw tightened. "It was scribbled in red on a piece of paper under my door," he said. "I just hadn't built it yet." The regulator gave the faintest hint of a smile. The simulation continued. Lantern held firm, cutting the feed, keeping the old model from ever seeing the poison tokens. Nova felt her shoulders begin to loosen, and then a new alert flashed. Not in Lantern. On the server console, connection lost. Node failure. The feed froze. The old model hung mid-calculation. Lantern's dashboard stuttered, then dimmed. "What's happening?" one of the clients asked sharply. Malik tapped furiously at his keyboard. "A subsystem we're running this on just crashed," he said. "It's tied into legacy pipelines we haven't fully decommissioned." Victoria appeared in the doorway like she'd been waiting for a cue. "Well," she said, "this is familiar." Adrian turned. "Nice of you to join us," he said dryly. "I heard there was a demonstration," she replied. "Thought I'd see how our redemption story ends." She scanned the frozen screens, then let her gaze drift to Nova. "And you brought the cleaning staff to a client meeting," she said, bold. Nova straightened. "I built this with them," she said quietly. Victoria's eyebrows arched. "With your background," she asked. Voice cool. "Data integrity lead. That must look impressive on a janitor's resume." Nova's fists clenched at her sides. Adrian felt something hot and clean slice through the fog of shame he'd been living in for months. He looked from the blank screens to Victoria, to the clients now watching, to the regulator whose pen hovered over her notes. "This failure," Victoria went on, gesturing at the frozen model, "is exactly what I've been worried about. You're hacking together secret projects on unstable infrastructure. You're letting unqualified staff touch core code. And when it blows up in front of the very people we need to impress, you expect us to nod along." She turned to the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said smoothly, "this is why the board has been pushing for a sale. Nexline needs adults in the room." The words hung there, damning and easy. Adrian had a choice. He could take the blame alone, shield Nova by erasing her role, frame Lantern as his solo folly and beg for another chance. Or he could do the harder thing. He thought of his father, of a mop handle in brown hands, and the way the man had once said, "You don't stand taller by stepping on people who've been kneeling all day." He thought of Nova's hands on the beacon draft, red circles around his blind spots. He took a breath. "What crashed," he said evenly, "is a legacy node tied to the very pipelines that brought in bad data in the first place. Nova flagged that in our internal notes, but I insisted we plug into it for the sake of the demonstration. That's on me." Victoria snorted. "Convenient," she said. "And she is not unqualified," he continued, his tone sharpening. "She's the only person in this building who's actually worked inside the vendor that fed us corrupted streams. She saw the fraud from the ground level. Lantern is as much her architecture as mine." He looked at Nova. "Explain how it works," he said. Her heart hammered. In another life, she might have stayed silent here. Let the men argue. Let the moment pass. In this one, she stepped forward. "Before I worked nights here," she said, "I did contract data entry for Vertex Data Group. They sold feeds to firms like Nexline. The problems didn't start when your model ran. They started when data like this," she jabbed a key, pulling up a still snapshot of the old feed on the frozen monitor, "was treated as gospel." She pointed to a cluster of almost identical account entries. "These all share a root she said. "Different names, slightly different details, but the same underlying pattern. That's synthetic amplification. Somebody built those to move the needle. Lantern doesn't just check if the numbers add up. It checks if the story they're telling is plausible." The regulator leaned in, interest sharpening. "Go on," she said. Nova swallowed, the fear in her chest twisting into a strange, fierce clarity. "If Lantern had been in place back then," she said, "it would have thrown a flag as soon as this cluster appeared. It would have frozen that segment, logged who approved or overrode the alert, and forced a human to justify touching it. You might still have been hit by other market moves. But this," she gestured at the fraudulent cluster, "wouldn't have been quietly piped into your clients' lives." "And the crash we just saw," Victoria asked, "has nothing to do with Lantern." Nova replied, "Steadier now. We're running this demo on top of an old server stack tied to legacy data flows. The part that failed is the part you didn't want us to pull apart yet because it's too expensive to refactor." A muscle jumped in Victoria's jaw. One of the clients, a silver-haired woman with tired eyes, let out a short breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "I like her," she said. She looked at Adrian. "If this woman sits in any room where you sign off on data going forward, She said, I'm willing to keep part of my allocation with Nexline. On probation. If she's out, I'm out. The regulator nodded slowly. I'm going to recommend we treat Lantern as a remedial control, she said. If you formalize Nova's role, document override processes, and commit to decommissioning the legacy pipelines that just embarrassed you, I think there's a path to keep your license. Victoria's mouth tightened. This is highly irregular, she began. So was selling noise as insight, the regulator said mildly. Silence settled, then shifted. Adrian felt it, the pivot. He looked at Nova. She looked back, eyes wide, breath coming fast. He knew what this meant. He had just tied her public fate to his. If Nexline sank anyway, they'd both go down with it. And yet, for the first time in months, the risk felt like something other than punishment. It felt like honesty. Months later, Nexline's lobby looked different. The framed magazine covers were still there, but new ones had joined them. Not about overnight unicorn valuations or genius models. Articles about accountability, about a fintech firm that had nearly imploded and then built one of the first comprehensive data integrity systems in its sector. On the 7th floor, a small plaque outside a conference room read, Data Ethics and Sentinel Oversight Committee. Inside, Nova sat at the table with a laptop open, listening as a junior analyst walked through a flagged incident from a regional feed. Lantern caught it, the analyst said. We blocked the input, logged the vendor, notified the client. Nova nodded. Good, she said. And the override log, the analyst frowned. No one touched it, he said. For once, progress, she thought. After the meeting, she returned to her small office, a converted storage room with a window that looked out over the river. Her nameplate still surprised her sometimes. Nova Reyes, head of Data Integrity and Risk Sentinel. A message popped up from Mateo. Got the email. He wrote, I'm in. Fall semester. Computer science. Full ride. She grinned. Proud of you. She typed back. Don't forget your big sister when you're writing algorithms. Always, he replied. She stood, stretching, and glanced at the framed photocopy on her wall. The old beacon page, creased and covered in red. Below it, in her own handwriting, another line, foundations fixed, ready for the next layer. Her phone buzzed. Adrian, rooftop, the text read, eat air. She grabbed her coat. The rooftop of the Nexline tower was not meant for gatherings. It was mostly gravel and vents, surrounded by a high lip of concrete. But someone Adrian had dragged 2 folding chairs up here and a small table. A thermos steamed gently in the middle. The city spread out below like a circuit board. The river, the bridges, the impossible grid of streets filled with anonymous lives. Adrian sat in one of the chairs, coat open, tie loosened. He looked more tired than when she'd met him, and somehow more alive inside the tiredness. How was the committee, he asked as she sat. No one got away with anything, she said. So the success. He smirked. He poured tea into 2 paper cups. Chamomile, she asked. We're old now, he replied. We have to keep our stomachs intact. They drank in companionable silence for a moment. You know, he said eventually, when my father was still around, he'd have hated that I became the type of man who signs his name to algorithms he doesn't fully interrogate. He'd like you more now, she said. He looked at her. You think so, he asked. She nodded. He wanted you to remember who you were stepping over, she said. Seems like you've been spending a lot of time looking down lately. He laughed softly. In the good way, she added. He turned his head, studying her profile. And you, he asked, what would the Nova who was logging bad data at Vertex say if she could see you now? She considered. She'd probably ask how the hell we got here, she said. And then she'd tell me to make sure I'm not just swapping who I'm silent for. He nodded. Are you, he asked. No, she said. Not anymore. A wind gusted, tugging at her hair. She watched a helicopter trace a line across the sky, its rotors a distant thrum. I don't know if we can ever really make up for what happened, Adrian said quietly. There are people who will never get back what they lost. We can't, she agreed. Some damage is just done. He swallowed. But we can stop pretending the damage was a fluke, she said. We can make sure the next crack we see doesn't get papered over with a quarterly report. He looked down at his hands. at the faint callus on his palm where a pen had worn a groove. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" she asked. "For sliding that page under my door," he said. "For calling my math pretty and broken. For staying when it would have been easier to say, 'Not my problem.'" There were other thank yous in his voice he didn't quite say. "For being here, for seeing me, for letting me see you." She took another sip of tea. "Thank you," she said, "for opening the door." They sat there until the tea cooled and the city lights brightened. Neither of them said the word future out loud, but it hummed between them like the building itself. A year to the day after the first lantern demo, Nexline hosted a different kind of event. The auditorium on the ground floor was filled with clients, journalists, regulators, and employees. Camera crews parked at the back, lenses trained on the stage. Banners flanked the podium, Nexline lantern lighting up the pipelines. Adrian stepped up to the microphone. He blinked against the flash of camera bulbs. "When we launched Nexline," he began, "I believed we could make investing clearer, fairer, smarter. I believed that if we just built better models, we'd be giving people something like a compass in the chaos." He paused. "I did not pay enough attention to the ground those models stood on," he said. "A year ago, that failure nearly ended us. It hurt people who trusted us. It showed us that you can't outsource integrity and call it innovation." There was a low murmur in the room. He continued, "Tonight, we're officially launching Lantern, our data sentinel. It watches the inputs we once took for granted. It catches patterns we used to call unfortunate surprises. It logs who makes decisions, so we can't shrug and point at the machine." He let his gaze sweep the crowd. "But Lantern didn't spring from nowhere," he said. "It started with a piece of paper I thought was trash. It started with someone in this building who was supposed to be invisible." He gestured toward the side of the stage. "Nova Reyes," he said, "will you join me up here?" Nova took a breath and walked into the lights. She wore a simple black dress and, over it, the same Nexline hoodie she'd worn that first night. Hood down now, like a flag instead of a shield. Some people in the crowd shifted, surprised. He waited until she stood beside him. "A year ago," he said, "Nova was pushing a cleaning cart past my office. She saw something wrong in my work. She could have kept walking. She'd been trained, like so many people at the margins, to keep quiet when things above their pay grade looked wrong." He held up a framed sheet of paper. The original Beacon draft, red marks and all. "She didn't keep walking," he said. "She circled the cracks, wrote in the margins, and slid this under my door. She did what I did not. She refused to ignore the red flags." A ripple of attention moved through the room. "Lantern is what happens when you give that kind of voice a seat at the table," he said. "From this day forward, Nova is not just head of data integrity. She is also a co-architect of Nexline Lantern and a permanent voting member of our data ethics committee." He turned to her. And he added, "Starting this year, we're establishing the Locke Foundation Fellowship in honor of my father, who spent his life cleaning other people's messes. It will fund further education for frontline staff, the people who see the cracks first." Her eyes glistened. She had known about the fellowship. She hadn't known he would name it that. "You're going to make me cry in front of the Wall Street Journal," she murmured. "They'll survive it," he replied. After the applause, the interviews, the shaking of hands, the stage lights went down. The hallway behind the auditorium was quiet. Nova leaned against a column, heels dangling from one hand, the adrenaline of public speaking crashing into a tired, giddy buzz. Adrian appeared beside her, tie askew, jacket unbuttoned. "You were brilliant," he said. "I didn't trip over any cables," she said, "so I consider it a win." He smiled. "Here," he said. He pulled something from his inner pocket, a folded sheet of paper, unbranded, no Nexline logo. He held it out. Her chest tightened. She took it, unfolded. In simple handwriting, on clean white, it read, "Will you build the rest of it with me? A-L." No mention of marriage. No mention of titles. Just a question that felt bigger than either. She looked up. He watched her. A flicker of nervousness under the usual control. "I know we've been busy saving the company," he said. But somewhere along the way, Oshuming and sizing each other got tangled up in my head. I don't want to untangle them anymore. Her throat worked. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her own bag, pulled out a photocopy of the beacon page she'd kept for herself, the one with the red markings, the one that had hung on her office wall. At the bottom, beneath her old note, she had added a new line in black ink last night. Foundations fixed, ready for the next layer. N.R. She handed it to him. He read it. A slow smile spread across his face, something lighter than any expression she'd seen on him in years. Is that a yes, he asked. It's a let's see how high we can build without forgetting the ground, she said. Together. He nodded. I can work with that, he said. He folded the two papers together, as if they belonged. Then, in the empty hallway where no one was watching, he stepped closer. The hug was not cinematic in the way movies were. No spinning, no swelling music. It was two people who had stood in ashes and static and fluorescent light, holding on to each other in a space that had once felt like a cage and now, somehow, felt like a threshold. Downstairs, systems hummed. On countless screens, Lantern watched the numbers flow and, for the first time, caught the lies before they hardened into reality. Upstairs, two people who had once been taught to keep their heads down lifted them, looked at each other, and chose, deliberately, not to look away.